Zach, I feel like you are trying to mess with me this week by moving and having a new background.
Well, Gabe, I didn't even move. I just put a new virtual background up, and I wanted to throw you for a loop. But no, this is the new buffering west or buffering east. I don't know which one of us is
Well,
which
you're
now.
technically east of me, although you're still pretty west in comparison to a lot of other people.
Yeah, so the new buffering studios, Gabe. I know you still have your own studio that you've built, so I'm a step behind you still. But no, we've moved a little bit here. We have some upgraded equipment as well. So if anyone's watching the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube, they're probably noticing this as well.
Yeah, it's just totally throwing me off, man. I've gotten so used to your other background, and now with you in your new spot. But hey, it's cool. You moved into a new
I,
place, got a little extra space, nice spot for the podcast. It's beautiful. I love it.
I kind of want to go back to my house and like take a picture of the old studio and like use that as my background. I've talked about doing that with some of our colleagues who have like really nice like the built-in offices and
Mm.
if he's listening to AJ's of the podcast, but I really want to just like take a screenshot of that and like make that my podcast background and see if anyone notices.
I am so jealous of AJ's background. There are some people that the virtual slash real. I viscerally hate the virtual backgrounds.
I
They just
agree.
drive me completely insane. And mine is super boring. And I know people have given me a hard time about my lack of background. And I have nothing up on my walls. I'm a simple man. I like simple things. But I'm very jealous of AJ's because his is beautiful. This is a colleague of ours. He's got these great built-in shelves behind him, and he's always moving things around on the shelves too. Every time I'm on a call with him, it looks a little bit different. And he's got these like he does it around Christmas. He'll have these nice little Christmas trees, and it's a beautiful thing. He does such a nice job with it. I'm very jealous of his
The
work
best
background.
the best I can do is put some canvas prints behind me from some of my hikes, which I plan to do. So the podcast studio will continue to evolve, I think, as time goes on.
Love it. Yeah, we need some more personalization behind you, Zach.
Well, hey, I'm all about the personalization, but
I
Gabe,
know.
big
We're going to talk about
episode.
that at some point today.
I'm sure we will, but I like that I just started out with big episode. I think every episode we have is a big episode, but
Every episode we get to the end and you go, "This is a great episode," and it
this is the
always
best
makes
one
me
yet.
laugh. But I love it.
It's the old like Tim Cook, Steve Jobs. Like this is the best iPhone yet. Well, I would hope so. It's it's the next gen.
It's the latest. Yeah, shouldn't we should be getting better at this, right? Like every time we do one of these, we should be getting better. I
My
agree.
my favorite, and then we'll get into the topic. But Gabe, we address each other by name. So like a lot of our podcast episodes start with "Well, Gabe" or "Hey Zach." But now that we're pointing that out, I'm sure our audience will love that. But that is not what we wanted to talk about today. We want to talk about competition and
Yes.
the question really that we all know that understanding your competition is valuable. There's zero doubt behind that. But there's a little bit of a conversation, Gabe, that we've had over the past week where are we seeing our competitors as our biggest threat, or is that more of a distraction?
Hmm. Yeah, I love this topic because obviously, yes, it's important to understand who your competitors are, both obvious competitors as well as maybe potentially less obvious competitors. But your customers don't necessarily care about the competitive landscape that you're operating in. What they care very much about is getting their problem solved. So if you focus on getting their problem solved versus what is my competition, I think we can all agree that your business is going to be a lot better off.
I agree. Gabe, going back to our podcast example, but do you remember like when we started this podcast initially, was it 2, 3 years ago? We had a problem, and that was it would take 3 to 5 hours to upload a video podcast because I was on that old legacy technology. That was my problem. Fiber provider came in, and of course, I didn't switch to fiber just because of the podcast. But I mean, we're talking 3 to 5 minute uploads now, and absolutely that problem was solved.
Yep, there you go. That's a perfect example. And I love this quote that you had in the outline, Zach, from our good friend Bezos. Do you mind just reading this one really quick? Because I think it's really relevant for and sets a good level for the rest of the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a quote about competition, and it says, "If you're competitor focused, you have to wait until there is a competitor doing something. Being customer focused allows you to be more pioneering. And I think this is great, Gabe, because I always hate the term like, oh, hurry up and wait or sit around and wait, because if you're waiting for your competition to do something before you adapt your business, you're going to find yourself into some trouble. And we've got some great examples, some of which I admittedly didn't live through, Gabe, but I think we've got some great examples of, waiting or not seeing the threat, or, being too focused on um, maintaining your existing business, then
Mm-hmm.
growing, then adapting, then evolving with technology, with consumer mindsets around you.
Yep. Well, and the exactly, and the cultural shift, the technological shifts that are happening all around us as well. In my view, it's much more important to be focused on all of those things than just so focused on your competitor. Again, yes, we understand you need to have a general understanding of what's going on with your competition, but I hear so many conversations when I'm talking to broadband service providers, especially of we can't change our pricing strategy. We can't change our product structure because our competitors are doing this. And to me, that's a very dangerous way to think, because you're then playing their game versus changing the game and doing something completely different, which is what some of these examples that we're going to talk through as we go through the conversation today.
Yeah, so let's kick things off talking
Yeah,
about
let's do it.
Blockbuster, right, Gabe? I
Yeah.
I honestly don't know if I've ever been in a Blockbuster, so I'm kind of like walking the line here, but I think of Netflix. So this is back in managerial accounting. We did this big analysis of Netflix and their financials and their business model as well. But I think of Netflix coming into Blockbuster space back in, was it the early 2000s, mid 2000s or so, late 2000s? But anyway, they came into this Blockbuster space, and they had kind of this new business model. They didn't really have the late fees that Blockbuster had, and then the whole business of getting the DVD or getting the movie you want to watch through the mail, as opposed to having to go to Blockbuster and see if they have it, and go through that whole thing. And of course, we all know how this story plays out. Netflix beat Blockbuster by adapting to changing technology and consumer preferences. And I think, Gabe, this is kind of my take on the Blockbuster situation here. Take it for what it's worth, but I think Blockbuster, underestimated the digital transformation, and resisted a little bit. And sure, there's some other factors from a managerial perspective in there as well, but I think there was just that failure to adapt and evolve with this new player in town.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And they were much more focused on, I think, the other types of video stores that were in market versus this new disruptor that was coming into the space, and not thinking about the cultural shifts, the technological shifts that allowed Netflix to deliver a very different product over time. Not only initially when they first launched with the just sending DVDs through the mail, that more personalized experience, the transparency around the late fees thing. Those are a couple of words that I know we're going to come back to multiple times here today, Zach. But I love that comment you made about the removing the late fees piece of that. That was a huge problem that people hated with Blockbuster. If you keep it an extra day or two and you get nailed with these massive late fees, it was something that was really frustrating for the consumer. So this cultural shift was happening of just people wanting to have more transparency. And then obviously, ultimately, with the move to streaming, I want it and I want it now. You're sort of joking about never stepping foot into a Blockbuster, but there was a period of time where you actually had to go to a store to get a DVD. You had to go to a store to get music. You didn't just get to fire up Spotify and listen to whatever you wanted at that exact moment. So this cultural shift was happening into the, hey, I want it and I need it and I expect to have it now. And I think that was a huge reason why Netflix succeeded versus what precipitated Blockbuster's decline.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the music streaming, and going and buying music, and I think that's another great example too. You've got all these streaming platforms for music now as well, podcasting as well. We know that that space very well, but I think it's the same thing. Imagine these. Would you call it like a record shop? I guess I don't know what you would call them, but if you're going out to physically buy your music, I can't imagine that business model adapted very well with these competing technologies and this new way to buy music. Even going back, Gabe, I think of iTunes. Like in
Yeah.
elementary school, the 199 per song
God,
versus
it makes me feel 100 years old when you say that iTunes came out when you were in elementary school.
oh no. But
Oh
do you
man.
remember like buying the songs? It's like,
Yes, absolutely.
$2 a song. Whereas now, like, what is, I think Apple Music is 10, 11.99 a month kind of thing. Like,
Hmm.
why would you, I'm sure I'm going to get some hate on this, but why would you buy one song when you can buy unlimited songs kind of thing? And I do have
Yes.
one friend, and she doesn't listen to this podcast, so I can say whatever I want here. But up until like 2 years ago, she was still like buying CDs. Like in her car, she had like this I don't know what you call it, like a dictionary with like CD slots in it. And
Yeah, I've had those. I've had multiple versions of that in my life
yeah,
with
I
the
quickly
CD.
bought an aux
Yep.
cable for that car and solved that problem. But no, Gabe, I think we've definitely seen this even over recent years, though the evolving technology and when you're competing against, we talk about that feature to feature comparison. You've got to do something to stand out, and whether that's solving a problem or what you're going to be doing differently in your market is very critical.
Hmm. And I know we're going to talk about this later, so I don't want to step on like our wrap up of the pod. But what Zach and I really wanted to talk about, besides all of these examples today, and kind of how to think about this, is what can broadband service providers do differently as they're thinking forward to, again, not have that distraction of the competitor, but focus on what's happening broadly in the industry and in culture to help you understand how you're going to have to compete going forward. And this the whole kind of crux of this episode, Zach, was based on a tweet that I saw, which I thought was so great. And it said, your competitors aren't your biggest threat. They are your biggest distraction. And that just absolutely hit me over the head. And the rest of that, I sent you that whole thing. It was kind of a long thread, but it started off with that and then talked a lot about how looking outside of your current industry is a really important thing to do because it's going to give you an idea of competitors that may not necessarily be perceived as competitors. This is another one of my favorite quotes. This is from, to bring it back to the Netflix example, Reed Hastings, who was the founder and I think still current CEO of Netflix, actually, if I think. But his one of my favorite quotes of his is, "Our biggest competitor is sleep." I love that quote so much because there's no mention of Apple or Amazon or YouTube or any of the quote unquote traditional competitors that you would think for Netflix. He's thinking about it differently of, oh, actually, it just makes sense for me to build a product that is so great that my customers don't even want to turn it off to sleep.
And the thing I want to point out there about that Netflix example is, there's no mention of Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Hulu, so on. They all have the same base product. They're all streaming content, right? And I remember back in my prime, when you wanted to watch a show, everything was on Netflix, right? Like you could just go to Netflix and you could stream the movie Hot Rod. You could stream Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Rec, The Office. Just listing off my favorite shows, New Girl. You could watch everything. But now everyone has their own app. A lot of these larger distributors have their own app as well. So it's coming down to feature to feature. But now I think there's a big customer experience component into this as well. And
Mhm.
when I look at Apple, they've leaned very heavily into having that original content. So something that maybe Netflix and Hulu don't have the best original content. I don't want to say that. They have some really good shows, but they're really
Apple's has been so strange where they've been focused really on like quote unquote premium content. They just don't put out
that's
as much volume, but
I
they
would
want
love
it
to
to
see
be
the
seemed.
financials on this because there's
Oh gosh. Yeah.
there's no I could be wrong, but there's no way they're making money on this. And this
I
goes
can't
back,
imagine they
Gabe,
are.
I told you this years ago, but I said I've never paid for Apple TV Plus, but I've
Hmm.
always had it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But again, there's just so many ways to differentiate yourself when your base product is streaming media.
This may be before your time too, but there was a period of time where Netflix, once a show stopped, you actually had to go back to like the main screen and then click on the next episode. And then if then eventually they moved to just autoplay if you're watching a series, it's going to just autoplay into that next episode. So when we think about our competitor is sleep, quote
Sleep, yeah.
unquote, the autoplay of the next episode after 3, 2, 1 leads perfectly into that, which is, hey, I just want the next episode to start, because if it starts, there's probably a high likelihood that the person's gonna be like, crap, I guess I should just it's one more. I don't, it's fine. It's only like 25 minutes. I'll just bang this next one out.
It's one more, and the next thing you know, you're in season 3 of Schitt's Creek, and
yeah, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're thinking about how you got to get up to go to work the next morning. But again, they didn't think about the traditional competitor. They thought about the non-traditional competitor and how can we make our product more engaging. And we've talked about this one before too, Zach, but with Netflix, some of they obviously track an insane amount of data, but I think some of the most interesting things that they track is season completion and episode completion as key data points for whether somebody is going to churn or not. If you're somebody who's constantly completing seasons of shows, there's a very high likelihood that you are not going to churn off of that product. They also use that to then inform the investments that they make from a product perspective, so that if something has a very high season completion rate, then they're going to go invest in those creators because they know that's something that people like. So not to go too much down the data path, but I just love that aspect of leveraging that data, thinking about it differently from gosh, I can't talk today, from a competition perspective. I'm just so fired up about this. I can't even.
I mean, the personalization on that as well is key. And the what show they recommend next, I think that's critical too, because if they get that wrong and you start to not complete seasons, not complete episodes, that's another problem.
Yep, absolutely. I love this next kind of section, Zach, as well, that you threw in here into the outline around this idea around obsessing over feature to feature comparisons. Could you talk a little bit more about this? Because I think we, especially in the technology space, spend way too much time on this.
Oh goodness, we've alluded to this a few times in the episode today, but let's bring it back to broadband a little bit. And everyone does this. I've never seen a provider that doesn't do this, but hey, 100 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, us, them, 1 gig, 2 gig. It's saturated with that kind of feature to feature comparison. And it's at a point now where, even like the mobile app, I see this one a lot too. It's like, hey, we've got this mobile app, and I'm like, I can't think of a BSP who doesn't have a mobile app. Like, what can I do with your mobile app? Why do I need the mobile app? There's so much more to talk about than these, specific feature comparisons. But, I think that's where we go back to, can we curate this experience based on what we know about our customers and prospects, and, speak differently about what we are offering or going to market with in this case. If we are competing against the big guys who only have 1 gig by 1 gig. Okay, but we talked about this a few episodes ago following connections, and it was, well, all these experience, these value-based offerings. How do you compete with that? And when your customers don't understand the speed versus fee.
Yeah, well, and it's not just launching multi-gig into market. I think that's another conversation that I hear a lot is, we need to launch multi-gig because it's going to help us differentiate against our competitor. If your customer doesn't understand 1 gig, why do you think they're going to understand 2, 6, or 8 gig? And yes, it's faster, but if we're talking about it in just a technological way, why are people going to be interested in that? And another bullet that you put in here, speaking of why, is focusing. If you're going to focus on your competition, or if you're going to look at your competition, which again is important, right? We're not saying completely ignore your competitors, but focus on why your competition is progressing or failing. What is it that they're doing well if they're progressing? Or what is it that they're doing poorly if they're failing that's resonating or not resonating with the people that are living in your area or their potential customers? So that focus on the why, I think, becomes a lot more important than just the what of what service are they offering, what technology is being served, all of those sorts of things. The what is much less important to me than the why.
One of the things you mentioned there, Gabe, I just want to touch base on too, is, in the industry, we always talk about NPS, and one of the common trends, sadly for the telecom industry, is a lot of the big players have fairly low, and by fairly low, I mean extremely low sentiment
or negative
scores. Yeah,
in many cases.
There's some serious concerns there. So if you're a BSP and you're competing against one of the big guys or one of these larger companies who's struggling in that area, I would immediately start to think about, okay, well, how can I improve on that solve a problem and go and get these customers from them while still avoiding that feature to feature, because we both offer internet, but how can we be better at this?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great call out, and I I'm gonna call a little bit of an audible here, Zach, because I think it's a perfect transition into the next topic of looking at different industries and how you should be looking at those cultural shifts and technology shifts that we just talked about. And Zach and I were kind of brainstorming around what are maybe just the top three things that we think are really, really important that are going to be happening over the next few years, 5 to 10 years specifically, that are going to be extremely important for the broadband service provider space. And the one I want to hit on there that you just talked a little bit about is transparency. And to bring it back to the Netflix conversation that we were having earlier, the no late fee model with Netflix, that was something that was very different from what was happening at their biggest competitor at the time, Blockbuster. Again, people hated that. And so they went with a very different model. I think banking, I know you've worked in this industry as well, Zach, but there's been a big shift over the last few years of banks, especially new banks, the fintechs and things like that. The way that they're a key way that they're differentiating is being transparent about the price, about fees, no overdraft fees, no fees to send money, no, people hate that crap. And because they've moved away from that model, it's allowed them to differentiate against the competitor and also think about where is the industry going long term? What are my long term customers interested in? And a huge part of that, in my view, is transparency.
And I want to touch on that last comment you made there, but where are you going versus where you're at today?
Mm.
I mean, it's easy to sit and continue business as usual today, but is that strategy going to work 5, 10, 15 years when the next Netflix comes down the road? I can't imagine it would be successful.
Yeah. Well, and when your consumer is changing, when their expectations are changing, it's really important to understand what's happening at this broader level so that you can think about what products I need to offer. Just to close off on this transparency point, if we think about the broadband service provider space, what would you say is the number one pet peeve that people have with broadband service providers as it relates to quote unquote transparency?
Gabe, I could make a list. We could be talking about um oh man, I think I know where you're going with this, Gabe, though, and it has to be related to 12-month introductory pricing.
Yeah, we created a whole talk about a solution or a problem looking for a solution, but we created these all the broadband facts, right, to specifically address this challenge, which is it was very difficult to tell how transparent companies were being about pricing. And so this is where the whole broadband labels came from, which honestly kind of drive me insane, but I do get the reason for it. And it's so that people have to be a little bit more transparent. So at least it's a bit more obvious now when these prices are going to increase after some introductory period of time. But again, people really don't like that. It's something that our industry has been doing for a very long time. And it really drives people crazy when they sign up for this really low cost. And then after 12 months or sometimes even 24 months, there's a huge increase in price. Sometimes 25, 30, even 40% I've seen, maybe even more. But there's generally a pretty big increase in price. And the game you're playing is, well, people aren't going to want to call in to disconnect. So I can get some additional ARPU from them. But if I were running a broadband service provider business, I would just be transparent with my pricing and not have any promotional pricing at all, at least for new customers. I do think there's some benefit for existing if you're trying to get them cross sold into other services, maybe like a 3-month trial, things like that. But for new customers, I would never be doing promotional pricing because it's something that's been proven over and over again. We've seen in other industries that people really don't like. And it's a great opportunity to differentiate, especially against the large national providers that you're probably competing against.
Gabe, I've had fiber for, I don't know, what, 2.5, 3 years now, two different locations now, and that price hasn't changed. Whereas the competitor, who I will not name, yeah, but you can imagine who they are. They have tried to throw bundles at me. They have tried to do these different cellular deals, uh, speed changes, price changes. I mean, I've seen probably a dozen prices this year alone from this company trying to win back that business. But of course, when I go to their website and when I see what they're really offering me, yeah, that $39 price point might sound good, but oh, it's $75 in a couple months. Like how,
Hmm.
how do I feel about that?
Yeah, not great. And I think your generation specifically, Zach, and folks who have are coming up now just want more transparency in that versus people have just gotten used to it, and older folks like myself and above have just sort of expected that based on how things have operated in this industry forever. But it's a great opportunity again to differentiate and to understand that culturally people are just interested in more transparency versus what they've gotten from companies in the past.
And to build off that, Gabe, let's talk a little bit about personalization because we
Yes.
mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast. We have to throw it in now. But I think we're at a point now where consumers expect a personalized product. And Gabe, when I think of personalization, I always go back to, do you remember that Google Ads page on your Google account where it shows you like the categories of
Hmm.
ads Google thinks that you are interested in based off
Yes.
your kind of behavior?
Hmm.
And there's a footnote saying like, hey, if you don't want personalized ads, you can turn them off. And I remember I had this conversation with you, Gabe, but I'm like, why would the average consumer, why would you want to turn those off? Do you want to see ads? You're going to see ads, but do you want to see ads for something that's, something that you're interested in, something that's going to better resonate? Or do you want to see, the random
I don't want a bunch
ad
of
you'll never
random
buy?
stuff just thrown at me. Yeah, exactly. It's people want personalization and they're disappointed when they don't get it. And we are at this point now where consumers expect personalization again, especially there's this cultural shift that's happened in the last whatever 5-10 years, and is going to continue as your generation, Zach, becomes more and more of the consumer base, that you have grown up in a world of personalization. You expect personalization, and 1 gig as just a one size fits all is not personalization. You need to be thinking about what solution actually makes sense for this particular person, and then also monitor that over time so that you're making sure that you're aligning your services going forward to what that person is going to need in the future. It's some Zach, you're a single person living by yourself right now. Your needs are one thing, and in some point in the future you might have a family and kids, and your needs are going to change very dramatically based on that. And it's important for businesses to continue to almost repersonalize, I guess, to maybe create a word, to make sure that as you're continuing to grow, that the offers that they're making to you continue to be personalized based on the point that you're at in your life.
I love that you just made up that repersonalize because like as
Feel
funny
like
as it sounds, Gabe, like you're 200% correct, right? Like, like the 2.5 gig package I have today with all these different managed services in today are perfect for me. But in the future, if I want a camera or some additional security within my household, I'm going to be looking for something more appropriate. So I love that term repersonalization. I'm going to use that. I am going to use that.
it's like retargeting, but retargeting with
Well,
repersonalization
that's
too.
well, that's the thing is, personalization isn't static, and
Correct.
not to make this episode all about personalization, but I think of my parents. Growing up, they had all my siblings at home. Obviously, they would have fallen right into this internet family plan, whereas now today, I have one sibling who's still kind of at home, so it's a very different landscape. But man, like the repersonalization there, Gabe, we're gonna do an episode on repersonalization.
All right, cool. I like it. I love it.
But let's talk about one more here, and
Yeah, we got one more to talk about.
I
Yes.
think this is something that we've seen a huge shift on. I would say in the last 5-10 years, Gabe, and that's sustainability. And the example that always comes to mind here is, Gabe, have you bought anything from Apple within the last year?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
There's
bought some. I
so
bought some
you
air. I bought some new AirPods, which I hate, but it.
Yeah, so
Oh
I
God,
that's
as we've
exactly
talked about
the
before.
that's the last product I bought too. But when you got your AirPods now, it's in the eco-friendly packaging. There's like a little green leaf on it to let you know.
Hmm.
Even on Apple's website, like on their homepage, they will often say like, "Oh, X% of our Apple retail stores are powered by renewable energy, or we're offsetting, this. They're doing everything here." But I think this sustainability and environmental impact is really starting to take off as well, and it's coming back to what are the values of
Hmm.
people buying your product.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's been a big shift in values of, people that are growing up now are a lot more aware of sustainability. And, yes, there are a lot of companies that are leaning into this more. The one that I always could think of is Patagonia. And I'm not a finance bro, so I don't have like 9 Patagonia, puffy vests, but
Well, Gabe, I have to throw this in because I live in Wyoming, but Stio is a good company too if you need a new winter coat based
there you
out of
go.
Jackson. So
I do need
um,
some proper winter clothes because I had to go to Colorado a few weeks ago, and I did not have proper winter clothes, and I almost froze myself to death. But I survived, so
well, if we keep
live
talking
to
about
tell
these
the
two
tale.
brands, we might be able to get some kind of sponsorship deal and get you a coat that you'll get to use maybe once a year.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, that's probably right. What's the other one? Cotopaxi. I think that's the other one that's gotten really popular lately, right? Am I thinking about the right brand? That's kind of a
You know,
competitor to Patagonia.
I'm not too familiar with that one, but Gabe,
Okay.
I always laugh. Not to like sidetrack us here, but you get to use your winter coat. I don't know, once or twice a
Oh
year. I don't know
yeah,
how often it
if
is,
that.
but if I want to go get my mail, I've got to get a snow shovel and my cross country skis on.
I tell you all the time, man. You don't have to live there. It's your choice.
Yeah, you have to experience it. As much as we complain, the summer season offsets.
Yeah, that's true. It is nice, and you live in a beautiful place, so
I mean, if you
it
like
is a lovely
skiing
spot
too.
to live. Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's no skiing anywhere close to me. We're not
So
that close.
Patagonia.
Patagonia, yes. So Patagonia, I think is going to. I mean, they're to me like the the cream of the crop when it comes to sustainability and how thoughtful they are about recycling all of the recycling their clothing to make new clothing, those sorts of things, right? They're just like best of breed when it comes to this, but it's so ingrained in the culture of their company that people will go out and pay significantly more amounts of money to purchase their clothes because they know that there's this sustainability component that's built around the culture of their organization. And I think that's just a really interesting business model to look at, and one where any business could make small tweaks and start to lean a little bit more into talking about sustainability within their marketing. And that is something that if we look out in the future, if we look out 5 years, if we look out 10 years, I think that's something that's going to be a really key differentiator for a lot of broadband service providers, is talking about the things that they're doing to provide a more sustainable environment, and speaking to the benefits that they're delivering by being thoughtful around all of that. And it's something that I really believe will be a key differentiator versus competitors. I know I said I wasn't going to talk, say it in that way specifically, but again, it's skinning to where the puck is going, not where it's at right now, right? Like that's a great way to kind of separate yourself right now based on where you think the needs and desires of people are going to be in the future.
I agree. And it goes back to something we said at the beginning of the podcast is why would you wait for your competition to do this? If we are starting to see this, if we're going to be seeing more of this, why would I wait for the, in my example, BSP B and C to come in and do this when I could get ahead of this now? And, if you're a
It's a great
local
call.
company as well, I think there's an added sense of trust with you as well. So again, I think it just goes back to, looking to see what's next and not where you're at today. Where do you want to
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, that's a much better way to say it. I love that you wrapped it up that way, Zach. I think that's exactly it. Is why would you wait for your competitor to do something and then you're fighting from behind? If it's things that you're already doing, if it's kind of this path that you're already headed down, why not start talking about it now? Because the other bit of this is then you'll be seen as the leader around all of these things, right? If you're the first one to start talking about it, there's a great first mover advantage, whether that's transparency, whether that's sustainability, whether that's being personalized in the marketing that you're putting in front of your customers, whatever it is, whatever your choice is as a company, if you're the first one to do it, then great news, you're going to be known for that thing. And I think there's a huge advantage in doing that.
I couldn't agree more, Gabe. And I don't have much to add to that. I feel like I'm trying to not say this is a good episode. It's a great episode, but I think these are all great points. We talked about the personalization to staying ahead of your competitors and not focusing on what your competition is doing. Of course, again, we know that's valuable, but not being distracted by what your competitors are doing.
Yes,
You
it's
want
not getting
and
so wrapped around the axle that you're just distracted by everything that they're doing, that it paralyzes you from doing the things that are good for your business.
And if we flop that example we just did on sustainability, Gabe, like how would you feel if you were BSPA and suddenly BSPB came out and was starting to talk about their, sustainability efforts and all of these different initiatives, you would feel left behind. And the problem you run into now is, well, if you want to also focus on that, now you kind of just, you're already 2 steps behind at this point,
Yeah.
and
You're the
consumers see that
also
as
ran
well.
at that point. Yep. It's yeah, exactly. You're already behind the eight ball because they've already started talking about it. And unfortunately people are going to see that first. So yeah, huge first mover advantage here to thinking strategically about again what's going to be important. And just to close up on this topic, this is why I think it's so important, and this is why I loved the that tweet thread that I sent to Zach, because it was talking about what are the things that are happening in other industries that are going to impact your industry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can keep your eye on those other industries to see those cultural, those technological shifts that are happening in tangential spaces to yours, but still people that are going to be buying your product, that's a great way to stay ahead around that shifting landscape and making sure that you're staying one step ahead.
I'm trying not to bring in another example, Gabe, but we have just a couple minutes. So I'm going to add one last one, but I think of
Do it.
Tesla too. Like decades ago, Tesla, when they came out with their Roadster, they were a car company. Would you say Tesla's a car company today?
No.
They're a tech company.
Yes, very much
And
so.
of course they have, there's a lot going on at Tesla these days, but the technology and, I find it hard to believe that when they were building that original Roadster back in, I don't even know, it's 2005
Oh my
maybe, or
gosh, yeah,
2006 ish.
probably mid 2000s.
I
I
think
remember seeing one on the freeway and it completely blew by me and I was just like stunned. I
I can't
couldn't even
imagine
handle it.
the company at the time would imagine that. A lot of use of the word imagine there in that sentence, but I can't imagine they would think, 10, 20 years later that Gabe and Zach would be talking about their latest software updates and the
The software
experience that
updates
they
is still
built
such
around
a
that.
trip.
And the reason I bring up the software specifically is because I think this is the car industry, so we can say whatever we want, but you have companies like GM who are saying, oh, you want to use Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Well, you can't do that anymore. We are removing that for whichever reasons. And all the feedback was like, well, I'm going to buy in a different vehicle. That's taken away a
Mm-hmm.
huge chunk of the customer experience or the experience of driving this, being able to use those features. Whereas again, going back to Tesla, Gabe, we've talked a lot about the software, some of the AI initiatives and the non-car products they've been making lately. And I think
Yeah.
that's just a unique example of a company that has evolved pretty far from what they started at. I think you could look at Apple too, looking at even going back to the original iPod. I think that was a huge game changer in Apple's
Mm-hmm.
business. And when I say I think, I say I know because I've seen the financials and seen where Apple's at today. But again, these companies that adapt and evolve and continue to keep an eye on not only what their competition's doing, but to stay a step ahead of them and figure out where they want to go next.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a bullet about Tesla in the outline, Zach, and then I ended up taking it out because we had so much other stuff. But your comment about how far they are away from being a car company, you're spot on. And the bullet I had actually was about the Tesla robots. And they had that big event a few months ago. Well, what do if I realize we're probably a decade away from that being a potentially broadly adopted product,
Mm-hmm.
we're a ways away from that. But what do you think the expectation of consumers is going to be if they have a robot in their home doing things for them, like a potentially like semi-autonomous helper that's actually going around and doing things in their home? I mean, think about the consumer mindset of what that's going to be, and again, we're years away from that probably being a viable product at scale, but it's not that far away. Like it's in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetimes. I hope so. I really hope so.
And just to tie this
Eh,
back to broadband too, Gabe, and I'll end on this, but do you know what the definition of broadband is?
tell me. I don't know that I've ever really thought about it.
I don't. You don't even know what it is. I could read it to you, but I'm not going to because your average consumer doesn't know what a broadband provider is, or of course, we know what an internet service provider is, but these are terms the average consumer doesn't know about our industry. So when we talk about the feature for feature comparisons or the
Mm,
experience provider addressing someone's needs, I think it's much easier than people think to address a need of our consumers in the broadband space than to appeal to them as the broadband service provider.
it's a great point.
And with that, Thank you for tuning into Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, again, one of our best episodes yet, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on